Hey Nerf Herders, I'm Addy Thomas.
I'm Ben Milton.
Thanks for joining us for a new episode of the new Certain Point of View as we just explore the Star Wars galaxy and try to explain some of its mysteries, like what about the droid attack on the Wookiees? Well, today we have a special episode because we have the full Certain Point of View network as it's in its infancy right now. We have our very own Case Aiken from Another Pass and Scruffy Nerf Herders.
Hey guys.
Hey, Case.
And we got Matt. We got from Fun and Games with Matt and Geoff.
Hey, guys.
And then the other half of Matt and Geoff.
Hello.
Yay, we're all here.
Yay.
It all happened virtually thanks to the wonders of technology. We're all sort of in a virtual room all together so we can nerd out about Star Wars today. Before we get going with any of that, I just want to remind you that you can go to our website, certainpov.com, to check out all of the podcasts that all of us are a part of. We have content pretty much every single week. We just had your guy, Matt and Geoff, we had your episode about everyone becoming a critic and sort of the value of being a critic and sometimes missing out on the beauty of certain games because of that. That was a great episode. You can always check out that and other topics in gaming with them. And, of course, you can check out Case, revisit all sorts of movies, whether they're good or bad, on Another Pass. And, of course, we have the Scruffy Nerf Herders, our shenanigans in the Star Wars universe.
Shenanigans is absolutely the best word for that show.
I like it.
Yeah. Probably should be the subtitle at this point.
Right? We already
Shenanigans podcast.
A Star Wars D20 story. And so many subtitles to that podcast already. So
Darth
anyway,
Shenanigan.
Right. All of that is on our website, certainpov.com. All right, so today, now that we've sort of relaunched Certain Point of View as a Star Wars only podcast, we thought it'd be fitting to kind of go over the current state of the Star Wars universe, particularly the movies, since the Disney buyout, since Lucas decided to move on because he was tired of fans criticizing him and decided, you know what, let's have Disney get criticized for all of their decisions in Star Wars.
And I'm gonna dive into a barrel of cash like Scrooge McDuck as a result.
But to start, I actually want to hear sort of what drew you guys to Star Wars initially. And actually, Matt, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Sure. So my earliest experiences with Star Wars was through my father. Much like my music knowledge and my love of music has come from him, also was my love of classic movies. And I think it was this will give away my age, but I didn't see the original Star Wars in the theaters. I saw the special edition re-release, and I remember my dad taking me to see A New Hope, the special edition re-release in theaters, and how floored I was by it. And I feel like I had seen it on VHS before then, but like it was seeing it in a movie theater sort of as it was intended, since it was changed. That really got me into it. But also being a music nerd, my dad, when I was a little kid, would play the John Williams score for me when we would talk about music, or he'd be just hanging out in the house playing music. And I fell in love with the John Williams score almost as much or even independent of the movies. And that really sucked me into that world as well, because those soundtracks were so theatrical on their own, regardless of having the movie in front of you.
Geoff, what about you? What was your in?
It was definitely through my parents. I feel like a lot of nerd households, you're either a Star Trek or a Star Wars house. Not to the detriment of the other, you just have a preference. And I grew up in a Star Wars house. I remember whenever there'd be like the trilogy marathon going on, I think it was like TNT or one of the cable networks, my mother would always have it on. My family has owned the Star Wars trilogy in regular VHS, Laserdisc, VHS Special Edition, and DVD edition as well over the course of my childhood. Some of that was through my spurring. Some of it was, the rest of the family. I don't know. It was just I also saw the special editions in theaters. I dove headfirst into the whole universe. My brother had a couple of the Star Wars novels, the X-Wing series in particular, and a couple of the comic books. So I'd sneak into his room and start reading those. Then I started getting them myself, as well as whatever other novels I could get at the time. I got into the Star Wars customizable card game, which is
Wow.
yeah. I collected that. I got that. I got issues of Star Wars Insider. So when the prequels were leading up and the special editions were coming out and people were talking about all kinds of stuff, I had the fanzine, I guess, and it was Star Wars was probably my biggest nerd property growing up. Like when I went to Disney World, I rode Star Tours 4 times. I owned that series of the Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology, the Essential Guide to Characters, the Essential Guide to Ships. I had them. I memorized them. I have very fond memories playing X-Wing on my Mac. We bought a joystick purely so that we could play that thing because my brother and I used to try to control it with keyboard and mouse, and you couldn't because you couldn't center the mouse. You try to maneuver and you would just start spinning around. It was every nightmare about a trackball made worse, and you're fleeing a Star Destroyer. So Star Wars kind of bled into so much of my childhood and so much of my nerddom. The prequels left me cold, and around the time of the New Jedi Order book series, I started to fall off, and then around the time of Darth Caedus, I kind of wiped my hands of it until the Disney acquisition. So that's me.
It's funny when you ask Geoff information, you have to expect his life story. Podcasting with him as long as I have.
Star Wars is a bit of my life here. You need all of it.
I mean, that's why the Star Wars episode we did on Fun and Games was one of our longer ones, is because we have a lot of feels about Star Wars.
Many opinions.
Well, I don't think you should not be able to have a lifelong story about Star Wars. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
It should be that personal, right?
Yeah,
for
there's
sure.
nothing wrong with that. That's what makes it so great, is that it does take us back to early childhood memories. Like Matt, you were talking about like father and son relationships.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's my mom and took me to see Star Wars for the first time. So there's a lot of emotion tied up in Star Wars for me, and like you said, Geoff, you're like my house was weird. Like my mom was a huge Star Trek fan, and so like we had the original series on VHS, the complete set on VHS, and we would watch that
with the old
all
movie
time.
poster style.
Yep, and we would watch it all the time. But then, like, anytime Star Wars was available, like, I was totally into that, and she totally supported me in that. So yeah, I totally get where both of you are coming from in that regard.
Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, my first girlfriend and I became friends over our mutual love of Star Wars.
That is sweet love.
Yeah, we know that. I will refrain from sharing a lot of details of that, but yes. So yeah, Star Wars is kind of knit into the fabric of my life.
What about you, Case? Where does Star Wars start for you?
Oh, I mean, are you ready for the verse to be very similar to the first two right there? I mean,
Please bring it on.
So
Mine is the only different one, I think, to be
think
honest.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, likewise, my dad was a big fan and introduced it to me. Unlike Geoff, and I'm the contradictory one here, my dad was a big Star Wars and Star Trek fan.
Nice.
I was a kid during like the height of the Next Gen run, where every Sunday after church I would go, like we'd watch like the syndication run that was going on, and so Star Trek was also a big part. But like, it's funny, up until I started working on Star Trek fan films, I didn't think of myself as like more of a Star Trek guy. I thought of myself as a Star Wars guy.
Interesting.
And I mean, likewise, huge fan of it when I was a kid. Was introduced to it. I remember before the special editions came out, when they did like the THX re-releases, where they like remastered some of the sound and put them in widescreen for the first time on video. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. I didn't realize that there was all these things on the edges of the scene that we had never seen before. But
that's true.
Likewise, big fan of the novels. Embarrassingly, like a lot of the stuff of canon that I remember from the old era comes from the Young Jedi Knight that.
That was a great series.
Yeah, it was a great introductory one, and I read from there, and that's how I learned all this stuff about canon, because they talked about Thrawn, they talked about stuff going on all these different worlds. They talked about different bounty hunters, and they encountered them, but it's from the lens of like a younger audience member, so it's a little more explanatory. And that's how I like knew a bunch of the canon. So like then for all the other media, it was like, okay, cool. I get to absorb the things and finally read the material that I had read in these slightly simpler stories. So like I later got into the other novels. I later got into the comics, all the cartoons. I was a big fan when I was really little of the Ewoks cartoon show.
That thing was damn
You were the
adorable.
target audience, man.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
totally
pretty
was.
much.
There's no shame in that.
Oh my god, that's the first time I feel Ben has said anything semi-positive that involved Ewoks.
And like Geoff, I read into the New Jedi Order, and I kind of slipped up somewhere just because they were just hitting me so fast. I couldn't keep up with all of them because at that point I was later high school and just had too much else going on to like continue.
Half the writers didn't agree anyway.
Yeah, and like, it seemed like if you missed 2 months worth of releases, because they were like coming out like either every month or in very quick succession anyway.
Yeah,
all
I
of a
think
sudden
so.
you miss like huge continuity shifts. Like all of a sudden it was like Jason Solo is a Sith Lord. When did that happen? And it was just like, oh, I just missed the book in between. But now it doesn't matter because Jason Solo doesn't exist in any kind of continuity.
Hooray!
We'll get to that. We'll get to that issue in a little bit.
Is that better? Is it?
I think so. I think
Probably.
just for quality control, I think
No,
it's better.
you're right. No, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's get into that a little bit. Like,
Well,
you know,
wait, Addy, what's your story?
Well, yeah.
Oh.
Ben, what is your story?
I've already talked about my story a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
when I was a
you
kid,
watched the original when it was in theaters.
I did. Like, it was the very first movie I ever saw. I mean, I was a tiny, tiny kid. I probably shouldn't have gone to see it. I was too young to really go see this movie. But my mom took me. We were living in Mount Penn, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Reading, Pennsylvania. She took me to this really old theater called the Raja. Was it the Raja? No, it wasn't the Raja, but it was the Mount Penn Theater, and it was this old like classic movie theater with the balcony and the big red drapes on it and everything. And we sat front row center. And it blew my mind. I mean, I was never the same after that. Like, I couldn't stop talking and thinking about Star Wars. And I collected all the toys. And, I mean, that's all I did. Like, it was my first love of nerddom. And it always trumped all the other nerd things that I loved. I mean, I'm growing up in, like, the heyday of G.I. Joe and Transformers and Thundercats and Battlestar Galactica and all this stuff. And Star Wars was always the number one thing for me. It was always the thing that I loved the absolute most. And I would, and I collected all the toys. And then when I got into high school, I started reading all the books. The Thrawn trilogy came out in my senior year in high school, and I remember like drawing the cover of the Thrawn novel on one of my notebooks, and like my teachers be like, "What the hell is that?" Like,
Was it the one with
Master Sabath?
Yeah,
where he's got
George-
his hands outstretched.
yeah,
and you got
shooting out the light from all of his fingers.
Yep.
Space Wizard, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that we all know exactly
The
what
panel
that
van
looks
cover.
like.
Yes, completely. That's it. Yeah. So, I mean, I had that, and I had like Wolverine Special Edition #1 and stuff like that on my books and stuff. So I've always totally into it. And then when the prequels came out, it was funny because I was living here in D.C. and a lot of my friends were all over the country, so I invited them all to come here for the Phantom Menace, and everybody trucked in from all across the country, and we saw it at the Uptown here in Washington D.C. and it was like I remember just being like super excited and super high, and then like coming out of that movie like going, yeah, it was a Star Wars movie. I'm excited. And then, like, the excitement wore off and going, that wasn't a great Star Wars movie, but it was a Star Wars movie, and we're going to get more. And then the second one and the third one came out and being less and less excited about Star Wars until really the The Last Jedi came back. And then I kind of like got back into the groove of it and stuff like that. And, with my kids, I'm constantly giving them Star Wars stuff. I'm constantly like playing the music around the house and they know the score. They don't know necessarily what's happening, but they know the score. Like I'll catch my son just like singing Duel of Fates, like while he's playing with something else and stuff. And my daughter like loves lightsabers. Like we have a bunch of them just laying around the house, and she'll just grab them and start swinging at people like we're piñatas. And it's a big part of my life, and it always has been. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Awesome.
Well, For me, it's a very different experience because there's no like family legacy. There was no passing of the torch for me. I was not really into a lot of. I was definitely a nerd, but more into like history and into politics. I was in high school. I hadn't experienced it. I kind of knew the general beats of the story because you couldn't be alive and not know
Who Darth Vader was.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I like up until like this. I think it was, I want to say, sophomore year of high school was when a friend introduced it to me. He actually introduced me to Lord of the Rings first, and then and that started like then I started getting into comics. Introduced me to Star Wars. I watched and everything in order of release. So New Hope, Empire, Return of the Jedi, and Phantom Menace.
Christmas special.
No Christmas special. He spared me from that pain.
That's a good friend.
Yes. Then he showed me Phantom Menace, and he prefaced it with like, "This is not very good, but it's still Star Wars, and there's another movie coming out soon." Attack of the Clones. So I did get to see Attack of the Clones. We both ended up like when we came back from college. I think it was, I guess my sophomore year in college was when Revenge of the Sith came out. We lined up, camped out at the Uptown for it and everything. About the same time I was getting into video games. I played the Rogue Squadron games so much, the Phantom Menace game, some of the simulators. There was.
I played that old Atari 2600 Empire Strikes Back game until my fingers bled.
Oh my
God! The one where you have to shoot the AT-AT walkers.
Yeah.
And it's just an unending wave of AT-AT walkers, and I mean, oh my God!
I played the Star Wars trilogy arcade game every single day on my way from home from school until there was nothing but my high scores on the entire list there.
That lightsaber duel was so dumb, but so cool.
It felt so cool
so
that you
dumb.
were doing it. Yes. It didn't make any damn sense, but you felt like you were doing something at least.
It was amazing.
Yeah, so that was my entry. I read the Thrawn series. I think, though, Star Wars for me actually sort of solidified my interest in going into media, because up until that point, I was really into like The West Wing and into history, and so I was thinking, I'm gonna be like, I was into speech and debate in high school, so I thought I was gonna be like, I was gonna be a political speech writer is what I thought I was gonna do, and then as soon as I really got into Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. I remember seeing a behind the scenes documentary about Ben Burt and about the behind the scenes stuff.
All the sound design.
Yes, for sound design for Lord of the Rings, and I was sold right then. I knew I had to do something in terms of audio and sound, hopefully sound design. That didn't quite work out that way, but it did lead to radio, and that's how I met Ben and met another huge Star Wars fan. And I think Clone Wars really solidified me being a Star Wars fan, because we used to hang out we watched it from the very first time it aired. Like we were we were the original fans for the Clone Wars, even when a lot of people, like Star Wars was dead for a lot of people at that point, because prequels were was the last thing we saw. So, but since then, Ben and I have communicated mostly in Star Wars quotes. That's sort of a staple of our friendship. So, that's my journey as a Star Wars fan as briefly as possible.
So in conclusion, this is what nerddom does to your children, parents. Watch out.
Yeah, right, exactly. We can trace it all back to them.
Yeah, Addy could have been like an aspiring political speechwriter. He could be at Crooked Media doing like all those like Pod Save America podcasts. But instead, nope, we're talking about Star Wars in our basements.
Star Wars!
Literally in our
Doesn't
basement.
get any better than this, honestly.
Yeah, you know what? One thing that's funny is, so Addy, you came into Star Wars when there was a lot of Star Wars.
Yes.
And it's funny thinking back to when I was younger. Not like a kid, although it's sort of in the same way. Like I looked at a lot of things through the lens of Star Wars. Like I tried to turn things into Star Wars. Like I used to imagine, like trying to turn like Transformers into Star Wars, like make all the ships more Star Wars-esque. Like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it was an X-wing that was a Transformer instead of like just a jet? And then later, things like Dragon Ball Z, I tried to be like, no, it is just like Star Wars. They're just using like their energy blasts are the Force. It's just a cartoon version of it. Like you get to do it, but it is the Force. Like it works the same way, right? There's so many things I tried to explain through like the lens of like, no, I've internalized Star Wars as a thing that makes sense to me, and this is how I'm going to take a property and make it that way in my head.
I used to do that too. Like, and I would like, well, what would happen? It was a long time ago. So what happens if GI Joe fell in like a time warp and ended up in the Star Wars universe, and like, what would Cobra Commander do to get the Millennium Falcon, and stuff like that. And yeah, I played a lot of like, even like mashups of Justice League of America and Star Wars and stuff like that. Like on the playground, everybody would just pick like your favorite character from like some random show or whatever you were into, and that's who everybody play. I was like, oh well, okay, well this guy wants to be Gung Ho from GI Joe. This guy wants to be Snake Eyes. I'm going to be Chewbacca, and then that guy over, that girl over there is going to be, I don't know, Chitara from Thundercats, and and it was just a mashup of glory, on the playground growing up. It was the best. It was the best.
Well, so let's talk about the old EU, because that's a point of controversy for some fans. With Disney buying out Star Wars from Lucas, in that moment, most of the EU was wiped out. Where do you guys kind of stand on that? I had sort of limited interaction with it. The Clone Wars, which is still canon. The Thrawn series I really liked. I read all the novelizations of the movies. But then the only other thing was I remember reading a couple comics, sitting in like a Borders and just reading a couple comics here and there. But I didn't get deep into anything. So, but you guys obviously a whole lot more invested in some of the EU than I got. What are your thoughts on that,
Matt?
So here's the funny story is I never read any of the Extended Universe books. I got the occasional like Cliff Notes version from friends, but really I kind of shrugged and went, who cares, when they announced it. Like one of my closest friends for a long time now, Andrew, has pretty much written off Star Wars as a whole because he was deep in the EU and pretty much loved every inch of it. And so when they announced that they were essentially canceling the EU, he wrote off all of Star Wars and has continued to do so, which is his prerogative. But for me, like, the only canon stuff that got quote unquote erased, even though you can still enjoy it, was the Force Unleashed stuff. Like, I liked the first Force Unleashed game. I liked Starkiller. I loved the actor Steve Witwer who played Starkiller. And so I thought that was a cool canon to have this secret apprentice for Vader, technically not the first secret apprentice, as he's seemingly had many now at this point, depending on what lore you follow. But like that was the only real experience with the Extended Universe, that and Shadows of the Empire, that I had any close connection to, and was still kind of like, if they can make better movies, it's fine. I wasn't as outraged as other people because I just didn't get that deep into that part of the universe. Even the Old Republic, which I think is also now considered not canonical. Like, I liked playing the Old Republic, and I thought it was a fun game, and I thought the story was really cool, but I didn't care that much about it. Like, it was entertaining while I was playing it, but I wasn't, like, deep-rooted into it. I was more into it because I was participating in it.
Right. You enjoyed the gameplay. I mean, obviously, gaming is an important part of your life. So, did you have any love for Kyle Katarn at all, or was that another you can let go of him?
Not really. Yeah. I loved Dash Rendar until I actually was old enough to know better, and just realized he was a discount Han Solo. But Boba Fett's always been my favorite character. I hated what the special edition did to his voice and erasing that original actor. The Extended Universe had some cool Boba Fett stuff, and that's the only stuff I really followed, like his survival after escaping the Sarlacc pit and all that, which also technically doesn't count anymore either. So
until
again, what was that?
I said until it does.
Until it does, yeah, right. Until they make the Boba Fett movie and make that happen anyway, if it takes place post or pre, depending on what they're doing with that stupid new movie. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very non-committal about the big changes. Like, also, I'm at a point where I'm like, I'm old enough to not really have the energy to hate things. So, like, yes, the new movies have had their issues. Yes, none of these franchises are perfect, but like I saw Solo and I thought it was a fun movie, and that's all I wanted from that. It was never going to be an emotional opus or this deep connecting movie. It was never going to be that. It's about a guy in his car, essentially. Like the basest review, it's about a guy in his car. So it was never going to be deep. So I tend to take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt. And so I've listened to enough Certain Point of View podcasts to know that Ben can get pretty heated about some of this stuff. But you have an attachment in a different way than I did. Star Wars was never my number one fandom. I was way more into like comic books and video games and like Transformers than I was Star Wars. Star Wars has always been something I enjoyed and that I continue to enjoy. So I don't get as outraged as some of the other fans do.
What about you, Geoff?
Why God no!
So you were
seriously, it was a little disconcerting. I mean, really, before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I don't think there'd been more of a good general agreement between so many creators about a shared nerd universe. It was really a beautiful thing when you broke it down. And to just sweep it all away as if it were yesterday's trash, I'm over it. It was, in the general sense, quite upsetting. Just because, I read so many of the books. I played so much of the stuff. Half of the fun for me of collecting that customizable card game was because you were trying to piece together... When you're trying to print cards for a card game that is a... Before there were microtransactions, there were booster packs for actual physical cards.
Right.
And if you wanted to keep making those, you had to give lore to everything. The two guys who carried the sensor equipment onto the Millennium Falcon to search it. All of the instruments played by the Fizz band in the cantina because Fizz was the genre of music they were playing. And all of these things pulled together. And so, as you might have gathered, I enjoy minutia about nerd universes, and so it was a heavy blow. But again, much like Matt, I'm old enough and I guess grizzled enough of a fan to understand that this is all fiction.
First of all, no, that's not true. It all happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Exactly, not fiction.
But what galaxy? I need answers. I will be the space archaeologist for that.
Yes.
But it is all interpretation, and it's all an agreed upon thing. They're not it's just the same as when the Marvel movies came out, or when a new writer takes over a comic book, or any of these other things. You are not. I don't have to burn my old books. I don't have to throw out my old games. I can enjoy them for what they are, enjoy the connections for what happens, and naturally it's too unwieldy for Disney to try to tiptoe through all of that lore, because it is the best way to circumvent every last actually of lore. You can get all the fact checkers you want, and things are going to be missed. So it was the smartest move for Disney to make, and I know that.
Let me add a wrinkle to this conversation. I want to hear your thoughts on this case, but let me add this to it. So, you mentioned the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you added a new sort of a new member of the multiverse, essentially, to the MCU. So, and as comic fans, we already understand. We have the Ultimates universe, we have 616, and all the with DC, you have Earth 1, and
the Star Wars Marvel universe.
Right. We have all of this, but with Star Wars right now as it exists. Well, before there were sort of the varying levels of canon, but now with Disney, we have sort of like everything is canon. Do you think there's a certain pressure that we don't necessarily need by making everything canon, that maybe we could have had these multiverses within the Star Wars universe? Or do you think that's a path we should never have gone down? Case, why don't you kind of get us started on that?
Well, I mean, like, my perception, and maybe there's sort of a disagreement among certain communities about Star Wars, that before everything was canon, like, that it was presented at least that, like, if you're doing a book, or if you're doing a comic, or if you're doing any of this stuff, that it was all part of one larger canon, and I'm fine with them kind of tossing it out to a certain extent. Like I'm coming from being a very hardcore comic fan, and one of my big complaints when they've done these sort of like reboots of continuity to sort of streamline things is when they don't do it hardcore enough. Like my big problem with Crisis on Infinite Earths is that they didn't change enough. And the New 52 I thought was like, oh well, they're doing the same fucking thing again where they're not changing enough. Like they leave like special like properties that were more successful. They're like, well, we're not going to mess with those ones.
It's an imperfect cut.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a clean cut. It wasn't cut with a lightsaber.
Like Star Wars has never really lent itself to a multiverse concept. Like Marvel Comics and DC Comics, like DC had an annual tradition of doing multiverse stuff. So having here's a new continuity and a new on a new reality is not weird. And Marvel has a very dense, robust multiverse. So it's also not weird. Like it's just okay. We're now looking at this other reality. But Star Wars has never really had that. Like we've talked about how like they don't have even really a tradition of time travel up until more recently with Rebels had like a few hints of it. But it's a property that has not had that. And from a standpoint of like, all right, well, new studio, new rules. What's going to be the deal? I'm fine with them kind of saying like, all right, here's the cut point. You know, like Disney bought it. Everything from this point on, we've got to establish as canon or not canon, rather than really kind of going insane trying to figure it out. I don't know. I think for me, part of it is that the way the Star Wars expanded universe had grown had become a little daunting. Daunting may not be the right word. Tiring, I think it might be a better word. Because
something I'd noticed was Jedi kind of and the Force and the abilities therein in the EU. Kind of, it was an arms race, and just more and more impressive and strange things were coming about. So they were basically D&D wizards. So, and it's not even a joke. Like it may as well have been. And so, no, you're right. Waffling between the ideas just would have been more tiresome and hamstringing in the end.
Like, all right, some stuff is canon, but we're going to figure it out slowly, more so than they have. Because I know they are like, well, we're going to reintroduce stuff. But if they had just said, like, all right, we're going to figure out what books we like, and we'll tell you that those books were okay, I would be really upset. Because then we wouldn't have really a strong, unified foundation of what's coming forward. Like, that's not going to say that I'm not going to get upset about the way they handled a thing. I thought Force Awakens was kind of dumb. And I thought that there was a lot of stuff with the new status quo of like the later timeline that was kind of hacky, and that's a thing, sure. But that's a problem I have with just how they chose to do it, not that they chose to make a new timeline. I get upset sometimes with revisions when it is doing so in favor of simplifying things, but doing it in a dumb way. This is a big issue I have with like retcons, where like writers come in and say like, all right, we're gonna make it like a really easy sales pitch for this character now. Like Superboy is the clone of Lex Luthor and Superman combined, but doing so where it's just like without acknowledging all the things that would go into making that the case is bothersome to me. And likewise, I think that the modern explained future of this timeline is not as well thought out as it could have been. And thus there are some areas where, like, well, because we had a book, chronicling basically every year from the end of Star Wars, or the end of Return of the Jedi to, like, wherever the books ended, like, there were elements that were better thought out then, and it's kind of frustrating that we lose that, but it's not because that they tossed it out that it's the issue. It's that it wasn't. They just wanted to get back to a status quo of like, here's rebellion, here is empire, and it's 25 years later. Go.
Yeah, I think that when Disney took over, the only way that they could really kind of quality control everything is to just cut cut ties with the EU, unfortunately. I think you lost a lot of good stories and a lot of good ideas in that process, but you also got rid of a lot of garbage too. Like, not everything in the EU was a great story.
We didn't need Warlord Zinj.
Right. And like you said, like, it had become like an arms race. You're absolutely, and that is a perfect description of it. Like, every story was like, oh no, and now the Sith can just destroy planets by thinking about it. And now the Jedi can, fart life, and it had gotten way out of control.
And the super weapons, even like a literal arms race. I mean, the Sun Crusher.
Oh God, yeah,
Right.
the Sun Crusher.
Yeah.
Which I guess sort of made its way back in with Starkiller Base, sort of.
Kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure,
So-
they literally and proverbially shot their load with that first one.
So hopefully now we'll like back it back down to a more reasonable level.
Yeah.
I came to see the movie. I came to see the movie.
Womp womp.
So I think that there's like, the nice thing is that they are reintroducing some of the better parts of the EU. Like, we've gotten Thrawn back.
Yep, through Rebels.
Yeah, through Rebels, and we've gotten some of these other stories like a little bit modified and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that, and what, like Dave Filoni has said, like, I'm scouring the EU looking for good stuff that I want to bring back in and reintroduce.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, he absolutely used some stuff from the Old Republic as well, from Knights of the Old Republic, and sort of brought them into the background of a story in Rebels as well. So they're at an advantage where they are able to pick and choose some of the things that people did really like and revere, and they're sort of able to reintegrate some of that with a new spin, without having to try to jump through the hoops of like, all right, and now we got to make this all work together.
Right.
It kind of comes back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe idea where in the movies, they have to make it work within the movies. And if it's different than the comic books, it's because they have all of these wealth of comic books to pull from. Now they've given themselves a comic book canon, in some cases an actual comic book canon, to pull some good ideas from. And I'm glad they're doing a few.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
Yeah, basically, as long as they don't like Donna Troy it, like that's sort of like my big go-to as an example here of like how you can screw up a reboot. Where you're like, all right, well, we're going to streamline everything. Wonder Woman, she's coming into the modern era now. She's never been around before. She wasn't a founder of a Justice League. Here's her story. But then Wonder Girl was popular because she was in the Teen Titans, and they were like, well, that book's selling too well. We can't rewrite the story of that book. And so they had to explain how the hell Donna Troy exists as a superhero when how could Wonder Girl exist as an older hero than Wonder Woman? And then the amount of hoops they've had to jump through and to make that a thing, and they keep scratching their head being like, well, shit, hold on. I think we got it right this time. Well, no, wait, that still doesn't work.
No.
Oh, shit, let's get it right this time. Like, they can introduce Thrawn. Thrawn
well
they can
put.
introduce, as long as they don't pretend that the Thrawn trilogy occurred, or they retell the Thrawn trilogy, like, that's fine. But you have to, like, be very clear. Like, we're not going to say, like, oh, the Thrawn trilogy occurred, just, Han and Leia didn't have the twins. Because they were born at that point.
Right.
Story. Like, you gotta be like, all right, here is what happened when we do this sort of similar story.
I mean, even within the movies themselves, Luke did set up a Jedi Academy. It just fell apart a lot faster.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's wise. Like, one of my complaints about nerddom, especially when we start talking about comic books and the MCU and stuff like that, is when nerds complain like, well, that's not exactly how it happened in the comic book. That is not how they did that. And that's like, it's
fiction.
It's it's fiction, and it's also like a different medium and a different story. Just because Civil War is titled Civil War doesn't mean it had to happen exactly like you read it in the comic book.
And
thank God.
Thank God.
Yeah, right.
Especially in that case.
Or even like Lord of the Rings is the Lord of the Rings crew. Those guys are famous for that. Of like, well, that's not exactly what happened.
I'm just gonna say Tom Bombadil would have made a huge difference.
Tom Bombadil would have been awesome.
I would watch 5 hours of Tom Bombadil.
That's what I'm hoping that the new Amazon series is.
It's just
Tom Bombadil stories.
Can it be Tom Bombadil's cooking show?
I'm in.
6 seasons in a movie.
I mean,
There's a musical number at the end, and it never makes sense, and I want it.
I want it so bad, so bad.
So now we're at a
but-
weird point for Star Wars where we actually have adaptation as a thing. Like before every
Yeah.
new Star Wars thing, it might be retelling a story, but it was always theoretically at least a new work. You know, that's why like Knights of the Old Republic had to like go back to that like a much older time to do a similar kind of story, because otherwise it was set, you know, if it was set in the
make sense,
same era, it'd be like, oh, this can't possibly work because we're doing a totally. We want to have like a Star Wars style story, but Star Wars is already happening, so it can't be the same way. Like now we actually have the opportunity to do adaptation, and adaptation is fine. Like you can make changes, you can make all these things. The only area where I get worried is when they do an adaptation and make it worse. Like that's where I get upset. Not about it being different, but if they do try to do something similar, but then put a monkey wrench in there for no reason.
Yeah, I mean that's tricky, you know, because it's hard to know that you're screwing it up in the process. You know what I mean? Like I think even some of the worst ideas have great intentions. You know, it's hard. I think it's hard. Like we're gonna get some Star Wars adaptations that nobody likes. Like that's gonna happen.
Yeah. I had to come to terms with that early on in this process. Like once Disney bought it, I was just like, I just know like if we're gonna get a Star Wars movie every year, there's gonna be some duds along the way.
We're gonna get Thor 2 eventually.
Listen, Masters of Terrascasi exists on the PlayStation.
Right. Although, is it canon now, Case? Do you think it's canon now?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I'm going to choose to believe that it is, and we're going to move forward.
I want Arden Lynn Winter Soldier. I want this.
Well, Geoff, it'll be interesting to see your reaction to Solo, because you might have a little bit of a backdoor canon way of bringing in Masters of
Master Terrascasi. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm the only person in this conversation who hasn't seen Solo yet.
Yeah.
Correct. I'm very bad at going to the movies, and it's this is one of those. My wife has to see it with me. We're gonna see it together. We just need to find the time. So if we start getting spoiler heavy, I will leave the room for a couple of minutes.
Well, without getting into spoilers, let's actually talk about the anthology movies. So we'll end on sort of the saga movies a little bit, but. What are your guys' thoughts? So, you know, obviously now we're going to get a movie every single year, and I'm sure there's a good chance that we'll get at some point we probably will get more than one movie a year. But for the time being, we're getting, you know, and alternating with the saga movies, we're getting these anthology movies. So we've had Rogue One and we've got Solo now. What are your guys' thoughts on what we've gotten so far, and do you like the direction that they're headed in with the announcement so far?
If I can start, I will say yes. Oh God, yes, yes. This is an unpopular opinion, but for Christ's sake, let the Skywalkers die in peace. Just let them go.
Yeah,
they've been.
I agree.
I'm 100% with
They've
you,
been
Matt.
at the forefront of these stories forever. I love them as much as everybody else. We don't need them anymore. Make it like the best thing I feel like The Last Jedi did was give us hope for an uprising of new Jedi that have nothing to do with the damn Skywalkers.
Preach.
Yes.
I've had enough of that. And it's why I liked Rogue One so much. I thought Rogue One, while it had its problems like any other movie, and I did recently listen to your Another Pass episode about it, and I agreed with a lot of the stuff that came up. I think that I'm more in line with Addy, though. Like, for the most part, I really liked the movie, and I think that the problems weren't a movie breaking for me, but as a whole, I think it's a great idea. Original characters, they all happen to die. Spoiler alert. You know, but it was characters I cared about, and I know Ben, you didn't really care about them that much.
Yeah.
But I think it's because you have to really look in between the lines to care about those characters. On the surface level, you were absolutely right. The characters were fairly two-dimensional and there was not a lot to care about. But it still was exciting to find something that had nothing to do with what had come before, other than this loose thread of, this is how we get the Death Star plans. Beyond that, it didn't matter.
I'm a big fan of the explain a movie badly. A team of questionable professionals die trying to send an email.
Yeah,
It's a great plot.
yeah, that's the base of it. And then with Solo, like again, it was I liked Solo the same way I like the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock movies. Like they're not quality content. It's not the best thing you'll ever see or the best representation of those characters, but
it's a fun ride.
Yeah, they were fun as hell. Every time they showed Robert Downey Jr. assess how to defeat something and then him go step by step doing it, and then in the sequel doing that, but him screwing up every time. Like, it's a brilliant device. And my favorite thing about Solo is that you have, besides Han, Lando, and Chewie, you have these characters that we don't know that can kind of go anywhere. And the actors are good enough that you immediately feel like Han and Chewie are Han and Chewie, pretty much from the moment they meet in the movie. Yeah. And so, to me, that's quality. Now, I wish that the anthology stuff would also break away from the previous content. Yeah. I'm the biggest Boba Fett fan I know, but I don't think he needs a movie. Like, I like him, but I don't. I like the mystery of Boba Fett a little bit. I don't really think he needs a movie. You know, I think a Lando movie would be better. But also that's mostly because I love Donald Glover. Yeah. You know. Right. But as a whole, I want these anthology movies to actually do more of what Rogue One did. Take tiny story threads from the main trilogy and then build this whole original story around it that we don't have to fact check. Because that's, I think, the best thing about them is that there's no... So I used to play, and this is a slight tangent, and then I'll pass it off to Geoff. I used to play the original Star Wars tabletop that came out before they redid the system. And so... I liked playing it with my friends, but the problem is I had two fact-check fans who would argue over what happened in the books, what happened in the movies.
Wow.
That's the worst.
That's a meta rules lawyer. Wow.
And we couldn't do that in the story. Like we were doing a pre-A New Hope story, and like we could interact with Darth Vader. But he said we couldn't fight him or engage with him. And I'm like, why? He's like, because he'll kill you all. Why? Because he's got story armor. I'm like, but that's dumb. If we can manage to kill Darth Vader, change the story. Be a creative DM. Don't pigeonhole us. And so that's why I like these anthologies. I think it really gives us an opportunity to create something that feels wholly original within something that already existed without going, what Ben was saying before, well, it didn't actually happen like that way, or, you know, I don't think that's right. You know, I'm hoping that we'll eventually get like an actual Star Killer movie or something like it. Like I want that to come back into the canon. As I've said, I was a fan of the first game. As far as I'm concerned, the second game never happened. But yeah, I think the anthology stuff is a great idea. I just think we need to move further from the Skywalkers and all their friends.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what the mainline movies have been. The mainline movies have been the rise and fall of the Skywalker dynasty. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do with the next one. And the anthology movies allow us a new point of view. Something beyond Alec Guinness having told us what the Force is. Beyond humanizing the man in the Darth Vader armor. I loved in Rogue One when at the very end you just got the scene of like, oh fuck, it's Darth Vader,
and everybody freaking runs
everybody loses it because they should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't get really a sense of that
from an outsider perspective. And I mean, we've seen Darth Vader be a badass and everything else, and we also have seen the prequel version of Anakin and everything else. But it's just like, to these people, he is just like, you're dead. You're dead. How much longer do you have? You're already dead. And you need those fresh perspectives to get that. And yeah, there is a huge living, breathing world that we got in the expanded universe. And there were books that focused on the Skywalkers, and there were books that, like, Luke Skywalker was a legend. Like, oh, Luke Skywalker isn't real and all sorts of crap like that anyway. So we got that in the EU, and the anthologies are giving us that same opportunity. Will they be good? Will they be bad? They'll be different. And we're all going to complain if it's too much the same. We're all going to complain if it's too different. So let's get some fresh stories. Let's get Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian. Right. Let's get Alan Tudyk as listen, I think we can all agree droids in mainline Star Wars movies are amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
It's always good to find those things where it's just like, all right, everyone's got opinions about Infinity War. Thor, awesome, good. Like
That's absolutely right.
there's our bedrock. Okay, now let's go from there. All the droids are cool. Let's build from there. So
Yeah.
it's I do appreciate the fact that we're gonna get some different looks into these things, and I'll like some more than I like others, and that's just being a discerning fan. So, and I like being able to tell people that my favorite Disney princess is Leia now. So,
Yeah, that is the
That is
best.
nice,
That
yeah.
really
there's
is
there's
the
some
best.
pluses. There's some pluses.
Yeah,
What
And
about
that's
you,
my
Case?
take.
Matt and Jeff, you bring up a good point. So, Jeff, like you, the minutia of nerddom is really appealing to me.
Oh, yeah.
Like if I find a nerd property that I know nothing about and I start to dive into it, like once I've gotten deep enough that I have like the foundation, like that's where you hook me. If there's just like a wealth of things, like I got into Star Wars because there were books already about it. There were all this material beyond just what was like on the surface. But the
Yeah.
movies were the foundation. So if you've seen the movies, you have the starting point. Same way for comics like that. Like all the things that have like big, deep canons. That's where it's really cool for me to like go into. And the
Oh, yeah.
anthology stuff is a great way of having that minutia, like exploring these things and finding out a lot about a much broader world than what we were previously given.
And it's creating canon as well.
So I'm excited. Like I came out really liking Rogue One. I will say I don't think I've ever walked out of a Star Wars movie not excited about it. I think the one that I was the most bummed about was Force Awakens, which was still a good movie. Like it's objectively a good movie. I just think it was lazy compared to every other Star Wars movie.
Well, you in particular don't like J.J. Abrams.
Yes, this is true. I think
I mean, that's
That was a
fair.
huge strike
I'm
for
not.
you. Yeah.
It's a
I'm
valid
not a-
stance.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of his either. I think the reason I liked Force Awakens more than most is because I was so excited for the casting. Both Daisy Ridley and John Boyega killed it in that movie, and I think that I even warmed up to the actor who played Kylo as well. Like I
Adam
think
Driver,
I think that's what the strength of that movie was. The plot was not, the storyboarding was not, but the casting was, I think, spot on.
yeah,
And why
everything new in
I
that
gave
movie was
it
great.
the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, totally.
But like I mean, I'm on record for a certain point of view talking about the things I liked about it. I just think that ultimately,
Right.
it was the laziest Star Wars movie I've seen so far, including all the
Yeah.
prequels.
I've been more charitable towards it since The Last Jedi came out.
Yes.
And I enjoyed The Last Jedi, and it made me like The Force Awakens more. I didn't dislike it coming out,
Yeah.
but
But I've
I found it
appreciated
harder to argue for.
Yeah, it's well, I'll get to the saga movies in a second, but I do want to touch on the anthology movies. The anthology
Yeah.
movies are what I've been most excited for. Like, don't get me wrong, a new saga movie I'm gonna nerd out about, but I do look forward, just like Matt, like what you said, I do want the Skywalker story to end. The universe has become too small with the prequels, and I actually think the opposite for the sequel trilogy. But if everything ties back to the Skywalker family, it makes this vast universe way too small.
Yeah.
So the idea of getting a chance to see new characters, Rogue One, getting a chance to see the nature of the rebellion from people who weren't Force users is one of the most exciting things for me. I
Right?
absolutely love that, and it blend, like getting to watch Rebels while that happens made it even more rewarding. But I want to see what the everyman's experience in Star Wars is. I want to see the scum and villainy. That's what I enjoyed about Solo, was being able to see, a little bit of that underworld as well. And I think one thing that I've always appreciated about Star Wars is, we have a tendency, and you talked about this in the EU with the arms race for Jedi and the literal arms race with Imperial super weapons. But I think there's a misperception in the Star Wars fan base that Jedi are sort of superheroes in a way, but I think the problem with that interpretation doesn't allow for someone like a Boba Fett or or a bounty hunter or a smuggler to be able to hold their own against a Jedi Knight.
Yeah, they're not Saiyans. Everyone can be exceptional here.
Exactly, and I that's what I appreciate about this universe, is that the Jedi, as powerful as they are, and as high as that ceiling is for their power, there is the importance of focus and the importance of discipline, so that they are still on some equal footing with the rest of their universe as well. So getting a chance to explore that, it's funny. up until Solo, I've been preaching, I don't want I want to like move into other timelines, and I'm excited about Rian Johnson's other trilogy, and then Benioff and Weiss's trilogy, and then Favreau's TV series getting a chance to maybe explore outside of the Skywalker saga and other time periods and other parts of the galaxy. But I can't help myself, but I want a Lando movie. And hearing until I heard that James Mangold is going to be directing Boba Fett, I wasn't excited about a Boba Fett movie. I wanted a smugglers movie, not a smugglers movie, a bounty hunters movie. I wanted that full crew from the Executor in Empire. I wanted
IG-88,
Bosk.
Dengar,
Yep.
Bosk. Oh yeah.
4 LOM, Zuckus, the whole crew. That needed to be there. There's also a bounty hunter from the Clone Wars, Embo, who's this sort of samurai looking guy that's really cool. That would have also fit in the group too. But I want to get some of that, so I can't help but be excited to hear about some of that. But I do understand that I do want to see the Old Republic. I do want to see other time periods and other areas of the Star Wars galaxy in the anthology films. But I will say, I kind of hope the Lando movie is a little bit more separate from these. I kind of would like to see sort of a Big Fish version sort of style story where you have Billy D. Williams sort of telling like tall tales of his past. We kind of have a little bit of an in with that with his Calrissian Chronicles that he was writing
Oh
in
man,
Solo.
that'd be so fun.
Right?
I would adore that movie.
That would be great. And he's allegedly been losing. They have him on a diet and losing weight. So I don't know if he's making an appearance.
Sounds like 9.
For
Episode
9.
9.
Yeah. But I mean, if that goes well, you might be able to get him in for.
Everyone
that,
was so mad
stuff.
that the guy in the casino wasn't Lando that they're like, crap. we gotta
Right.
put him in
Yeah.
9.
Yeah. Even I was. Just
We're,
like,
we're all mad at that.
like,
I
that
respect
should
the
have been
fake
where it
out.
should have been.
Still mad.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would have been like, and of course, if it had happened, then we all would have been just been like, "Oh, fan service, total fan service." I mean, you just can't please us.
We can't be pleased. I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah,
we
it's
can't.
impossible.
It's
Um,
sad. It's sad but true.
I wanted to touch on something that Addy brought up also about the nature of everyone in this world. Like, that was something that was really cool about Solo, and this isn't spoilery, but watching Chewbacca, also because it's a younger actor in the suit now, but manhandling people by their feet and their arms,
Yes.
throwing them around. Like, he is a super strong creature. Superhuman strength is what Wookiees have. And we didn't really explore that very much. So to get to see him fighting alongside essentially a bunch of humans and manhandling other soldiers was really cool because it reminds you, oh yeah, these aliens can be on par with Jedi without having damn lightsabers because they're powerful in other ways.
Yeah, until they add in Lobaka, and then you have someone who is both an alien with superpowers and also a Jedi.
Exactly right.
Well, like a lightsaber is the Ann Knuckles of the Star Wars universe with a lightsaber.
Exactly.
Do you guys remember the first Expendables movie where like Terry Crews shows up with that like rapid fire shotgun?
Yes.
How do you have a gun that a person could fire? Like, can you imagine if they actually like had some like concussive force weapon that a human literally could not use? Like, talk about an arms race that'd be actually like fun to see cinematically. Like having like aliens that are just like or weapons designed for aliens. Like the Plinkett reviews talked about how it's like the one weird thing about the lightsaber is that it's really designed to be used by people against people. Like have weapons that are for aliens. Like we have a vast alien species, and now we have technology to easily do it without having to spend all of our money on puppets. Like we can have CG creatures use weapons that could not actually exist in the real world and not be used by a real thing. And now we have a platform where we could actually show it off in a cool way, as long as people think about it in fun, interesting ways, and it's not just let's have spectacle for the sake of spectacle.
No, we don't go too Michael Bay down. Don't go down too Michael Bay.
Yeah,
on that
don't
road.
do that.
Right.
Don't go too far. Like look at some of the robots in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, particularly in that last battle of Attack of the Clones. There's some like weird configurations. You're like, why would you ever build that? Like that doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Yeah, they're pretty inefficient.
But like other ones, like the droids, like the destroyers from Phantom Menace, those were actually pretty cool, and they made tactical sense. And I would love to see more things like that in the Star Wars universe because we have the ability, and we don't have to have them all be like mainstream Star Wars movies. Like we could do some cool stuff with like there was a really good Han Solo book called Scoundrels where Han Solo Lando Calrissian, Chewbacca, like recruited a whole bunch of like mercenaries and scum and villainy to do this Ocean's 11 style heist. And what I would love to see is like what kind of security systems look like in the Star Wars universe. Like what kind of other settings could you possibly do beyond just like here's the war scenario, here's what the Empire has, here's like this boring shit. Like there's a lot of stuff out there. Like
and there's built-in terminology and stuff for those guys. You've got slicers, hackers of the Star Wars universe. I'm now just really imagining I want Terry Crews in the Star Wars universe, and I kind of want him to be an Old Republic Jedi Master.
Oh, that would be so
I would
cool.
love that.
I can see that.
I would love to.
I mean, I feel like in life there could just be 100% more Terry Crews in everything. Personally,
Agreed. Yes, I third that.
Terry Crews is never a bad casting choice.
Nope.
Yeah.
Like Terry Crews as an old school Jedi would be us finally getting like what Mace Windu should have been.
Yes.
Also, if he was an ancestor of Mace Windu.
Fan service, Geoff. Goddamn fan service.
The grandfather of the badass motherfucker.
Bludgeon Windu. Yeah, like can you imagine like a Seven Samurai style movie set in the Old Republic with Terry Crews as like Mace Windu's ancestor?
Well, and again, because the Jedi, there's a lot of like Buddhist and Taoist ideas. It's a white man's hodgepodge of Eastern philosophy,
right?
But there's a lot of fun explorations you can do with that, and if you've already got that, there's some wonderful stories you can explore with the notion of the Jedi and the notion of the Force without it being a Skywalker-a-thon. And again, another point of view on the Force.
Yeah, and I think like that's been like the refreshing thing. Like in this season of Rebels, they introduced a new Force user called the Bendu, and like he had a completely new approach to the Force. He was neither Sith nor Jedi, but he was a Force user. So they're starting to open that up, opening the universe up in those areas. I'm with you guys. Like I want to see the universe opened up. Like that was really my only complaint about Solo was really it was like, well, like we already kind of knew where this was going. It really didn't open much up. Yeah, we got a couple new characters, but they all tied back into something that we already knew.
Right.
So we didn't really go anywhere with this movie. So I'm hoping that as the anthology movies keep coming out, that we do expand on things and we do get to go to some new places and know to get to stories where we don't know how it ends. And I think maybe like as I was watching Solo and kind of having the same feelings about it as I did with Rogue One, I think it wasn't so much that it wasn't real. It was a little bit that I didn't care about the characters because I really care about the Solo characters. Like Chewbacca's like my favorite character ever, but at the same time, I was like, I know how this story ends. Like, I know where this is going. Like Rogue One, I know where this is going. I know how this movie ends, and it was hard for me to kind of just like enjoy the ride and just be like, oh, I don't know what's happening. Like, I like to be surprised in movies. I like to be taken on a ride of somewhere where I don't know where I'm going. So I'm hoping that as we go and get past the Lando movie and get past the Boba Fett movie, that we start getting into some other areas. And Addy, you already mentioned, like, of course, we have the new Rian Johnson movies. We have the new Beinhoff and Weiss movies. We have the new TV series coming out. Like, all that is hopefully new stories. And then we also have, well, except for it's not really all that new. That's going to be kind of retreading is the new Dave Filoni show.
The next animated series will be Resistance. But you know what? That will do some of the work. You know, Casey, you were mentioning earlier, some of the lifting of like establishing and coloring in the lines for, you know, where we are with the First Order and the Resistance, so that
and it should help differentiate.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, that's where Filoni really shines is you know, like taking like, and I think that's kind of like the roadmap that Disney seems to be forming with this IP is like the movies are like the big broad strokes, and then the TV series seem to be like doing, and the books seem to be like coloring in between there and filling it in and giving
mastheads and
details.
rigging kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, and I'm totally okay with that. Like that makes sense to me. It's hard to get too detailed in a big summer action, flick for, that you made for $700 million. It's
because
tough.
I'm glad 3PO didn't tell us the story of how he got his red arm in the movie. I'm all right with it being in a comic.
Yeah, because it wasn't a movie-worthy story.
Yeah, because look, shutting up C-3PO is one of the great joys of just existence.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the sort of the general direction of the saga movies before we wrap up this particular episode. What do you guys? I'll just go on record right now. I'm very happy with the direction. I absolutely love and adore The Last Jedi, despite some of its flaws. But I absolutely love the direction it's going in. Force Awakens, obviously could have done some cool things, but I also feel that this is a consequence of Lucas wrapping up the story in Return of the Jedi that he intended to continue on for 7, 8, and 9. So it's sort of having to retcon some of that and reestablish new things that were originally supposed to be other things. Like, Leia was not originally supposed to be the other Skywalker sibling. So now, Rey can't really be that other Skywalker sibling. So now we have to pass it on to this new generation. So I'm happy with this general direction, but what are your guys' thoughts?
I really enjoy the new direction a great deal. One of the reasons why I said The Last Jedi has made me feel much more charitable towards The Force Awakens is because after being so burned by the prequels, having movies that are coming out where they're going, no, this is episode 7. This is mainline. We are committing to this. And there being, again, no correct steps because people are going to be mad no matter what.
Right.
It was a wonderful movie about trying to go back to the past as hard as you can and noticing kind of a meta on top of that. And I only apply that meta because The Last Jedi does such a good job of going, sometimes you've just got to burn it all to the ground. All of it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed The Last Jedi. I stayed with it the whole time in the movie theater. I didn't have the Yoda with a lightsaber feeling of walking out going, that was amazing. Oh God! The longer I think about it, the more horrified I feel. I have a very gross metaphor to compare that to, but anyway,
you're on the right show.
I don't know why you're holding back.
Well, fair enough. It's basically like pissing the bed, or pissing your pants. It's a warm feeling for a moment, and you get a feeling of relief, but then all of a sudden you're soaking wet in piss. And it's gotten cold, and you smell, and it's terrible. But for that one little moment, it was kind of nice. But this is a bad decision all around. Really bad.
That is so accurately a great review of Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah. And so the Last Jedi had such a wonderful thing of okay, we needed to make this feel like we're hitting all the story beats so that when we suddenly turn on several of them, They didn't, of course, burn it completely to the ground, but they cut a lot of chaff, and they burned a lot of sacred cows, and again, even in the characters, Rey is trying to find her past. Kylo Ren wants so badly to be this image that we know to be fiction of Darth Vader. And he is trying so hard to run back to that. And the First Order is trying so hard to be the Empire. But you can't. And The Last Jedi starts cutting those threads. And it makes me very excited for what the next movie is going to be.
Absolutely. I have a hard time imagining what's going to be in the next movie. And I'm
and
so excited
that's exciting!
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's what I want out of my Star Wars. I want to not know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the dangerous territory we hit with Force Awakens is that because it was essentially a retread storyboard-wise of A New Hope, that we kind of were able to anticipate what was coming. But whereas with The Last Jedi, there were a lot of curveballs. I mean, first of all, since I have a forum to say it, if I hear one more person say that Princess Leia or General Organa couldn't do that, I'm going to smack them.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
I'll hold them down for you.
There are no rules. And to make Carrie Fisher such a badass makes perfect sense, especially since there were plenty of mediums that they consumed where they said she was the stronger Force user. She chose not to engage in becoming a Jedi Knight. And that
she suddenly became a badass because she wasn't in the original trilogy?
Yeah, it was just so aggravating to me. I thought that scene was incredible. I thought it was a cool way to kind of retcon and show how great Carrie was, just in general, because she's been such a badass in and outside of the movies.
Yeah.
Also the fact that, and I can't quote this, my wife actually said this when we came out of the movie, the fact that toxic masculinity was the villain, essentially Poe running off with his chest out like Han Solo did in the past movies, and then failing every time because he was an idiot and didn't listen to everyone around him, I appreciated, because it turned a trope on its head. Again, talking about the meta. The idea that the hero's always right. And in this case, it wasn't. And I liked the casino stuff because you got heart from characters who you normally don't see. The fact that that Rose's character got so well developed. Yes, the casino planet wasn't necessarily a necessity to the overall plot, but it was awesome to get to know an engineer who worked on ships, who wasn't a Skywalker, and that she was important.
And it was so many things fail because they're going to fail. Well, why was this necessary? It didn't succeed. Exactly.
Yeah, that was the absolute point,
That was the point!
The Canto Bight scenes are in service of Poe's, not ineptitude isn't the word I want to use, but the arrogance of, of
absolutely.
Poe. And
It's his arc.
It resonates.
The point is that by the end, he should have learned, the hotshot.
Yeah, this is
exactly right.
Han Solo is a legend and was lucky. That's not how it always works. And
It works for the individual, but this is a group.
Yeah,
right.
and so for overall, I tend to agree with everybody else. I like the new saga stuff, and I also can't really imagine where we're going. I mean, they said that Leia was supposed to be a part of the next movie, and now that we don't have Carrie, I don't want to CGI Carrie, the General Tarkin thing in Reflections, I agree, looked kind of cool, but once it was face head on, it doesn't work.
Too much, yeah.
And so I don't really want that. Also, Carrie Fisher is so unique as a person. I don't want there to be a not actual version of her in a movie. It just feels cheap to me. But that all said, I think that the saga movies are getting to a point where we are letting go of the Skywalkers finally. The main trilogy will continue in their legacy, but they won't necessarily be the focus anymore, except for Ben. But if it comes out later that Daisy Ridley's character is actually a Skywalker, I will throw something because I don't want that.
Yeah.
Me either.
Yeah.
And
that would
that's
be
what
the
I'm
worst
afraid
thing
of.
that they could do. Yeah.
I remember dreading before Last Jedi coming out that they were going to do that. That I was convinced that they were going to go with her as a Skywalker, maybe a Kenobi. But,
I was leaning towards Kenobi myself.
And, I'm sure I would have come to terms with it. But I just felt, I remember thinking, that would be the laziest thing to do. And I remember thinking, I hope that she is not connected to anyone, that her lineage doesn't matter. And I was so happy that they were bold enough to do that. I think that's the kind of thing that I don't think Disney gets enough credit, or Rian Johnson doesn't get enough credit for just how bold of a decision that was to go there to make the universe bigger again.
It was the first time where they took the concept of legacy and inheritance and just went.
Well,
oh God, it was such a good relief.
Well, because I think also we have a story with fictional characters, and everyone wants to be a hero, and now they can. There's no more legacy. It's you want to be a hero, you believe in what's right, go be a hero. A lot of people said that shot at the end with the little boy in the ring and the broom was cheesy, and I thought it would. I
loved that.
It was cheesy, but it was good
but it
because
was the right
of it.
kind of cheesy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It gives these movies. Look, these movies aren't for us. They are for us, but they're not. They're for kids. They are for kids. They are for fantasy consumers. And so when adults 40 plus and or 30 plus bitch on the internet about it, it frustrates me because these saga movies are not for you. They're for a new generation to enjoy what we had before. So either like it or don't like it, and feel free to discuss it, but don't bash it just because you don't like it.
Right. I mean, it goes back to how we started this conversation, where every single one of us started with Star Wars when we were young. I think Addy, you were probably the oldest out of us, but the rest of us all started watching Star Wars and caring about Star Wars when we were young, and and having a big impact on us. Like that hasn't changed just because we're older. But you're absolutely right. These movies aren't for us. It's great that we appreciate them and love them as much as we do, but at the end of the day, it really is. It's about my kids, loving Star Wars, or other kids loving Star Wars and becoming fans. That's who it's for.
I love seeing people often get a lot of criticism for how many pictures of their kids they put on Facebook, but I do love seeing how many people have latched on to Rey and Finn as characters.
It's
yes.
the best.
Oh man,
Comic Cons, those are the best. I love seeing the little kids dressed up. That is the best. It warms my heart.
Yes.
It really does. I'm like, oh, there's hope. Right. There really is hope for
makes me
kids.
feel feelings.
And I don't feel a lot.
I'm a sociopath. It's okay. No, it's absolutely. I think I did bring up the Star Trek Star Wars thing a little bit at the very beginning. But both of those are, science fiction in general, there's a lot of hope written into its DNA.
Yeah.
Even in dystopia there is. And I feel like something like Star Trek is the hope for what we can be when we can become great. And Star Wars is more of a hope when everything says we can't be great.
Right.
And facing against that. And that really resonates with kids. It resonates with plenty of adults. It resonates beyond boundaries, beyond all kinds of things. And the expanding of the universe just gives more opportunities for people to find their hero in the Star Wars universe and find their hope and find to find their thread, find themselves. And that's what we all did when we saw it.
Yep. Absolutely right.
I think on that note, I'm going to wrap up this episode. Actually, real quick, do you guys each want to plug some of the things you guys are doing? Start with you, Case.
Yeah. So if you're a regular listener to the show, you know about Another Pass, where we talk about movies that could have been bad, could have been good, but with some small changes could be even better. We just did one for Rogue One, which I was really happy with in general. And the one we did before that was Glory Days, which, Geoff, you and I had a really nice conversation about, a movie that, by all rights, neither of us should really have talked nearly that much about. And also, I am the Dungeon Master for Scruffy Nerf Herders, which is just a fun romp, and you guys have had such a great adventure. And I love pulling the minutia of Star Wars nerdery. I had friends who had the cards, but I was not a collector myself. But I've looked up the cards for little details to flesh out that world. It's really cool using it as an opportunity to be what kind of weird shit was going on at this time in the Star Wars universe, even if it's not canon. What are cool things to reference and play with.
Geoff, Matt, what do you guys got for us?
Well, so I do want to direct people, if you've not listened to Fun and Games, which is a gaming podcast that Geoff and I do, our 16th episode of the series, we focused on Star Wars video games, and we talked about everything from the NES all the way to modern consoles and MMOs and everything in between. So I think that'd be a great episode to start with if you're a diehard Star Wars fan. And then our most recent episode, as we hinted at a little earlier, is about engaging with reviews and how that can ruin an experience for gaming or add a lot of value to gaming experiences. Me and Geoff with that show try and come at it from fans first, and then game aficionados, if you will, second, because at the end of the day it's about enjoying games, and that sometimes this world there isn't fun in games, and we're trying to bring that back.
Ben, you got some stuff going on Twitch, or actually Facebook gaming, actually.
Yeah, as soon as I get my computer fixed. I'm having some technical difficulties with my audio on the stream. But, I'm playing for Extra Life, which is a fundraiser. Actually, Matt is actually the one who kind of turned me on to it, so thank you, Matt. Doing that. Going to play 24 hours coming up in November, but starting to raise money for Children's Hospital. Just got word today, actually, that I got another donation from a company is doing a match for somebody who donated to me, and so that puts us over $800 raised already for Thank you. Yeah, it's not me. It's them. I'm really just super thankful to be able to do it to help out the kids. So, yeah. So that's what's going on with me. So you can find that at CPOV Ben.
Certain POV.
CPOV Ben.
Okay.
On Facebook.
On Facebook.
Yep.
Got it. And of course, links to all of these podcasts and to your Facebook gaming stream, all of those are available on our website, along with all of our other social media. You can go to our website, certainpov.com. In fact, be sure to check us out on social media. Let us know what you think about the direction of the Star Wars universe under Disney right now. What do you think of the new movies and additional lore as well? All of that you can do on our social media or on our website, certainpov.com. And until next time, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.